Romney's desk, who has already said he'd sign it, repealing Obamacare. So we have gone from 60 votes needed. I wanted to see it go on June 28th, but it didn't. It didn't. Now we got to live with what we've got to live with. But we have 4 more months, and I've been fighting 2.5 years, and so have all of you. Hey, what's 4 more months? We can hang in there that long, and it doesn't mean waiting and hoping. It means working, knocking, like Joe was talking about, door knocking, phone calling, talking to people at work in your neighborhood, your crazy cousin, get them all to the polls and talk them through why they need to vote for smaller government, constitutional government, and to repeal this law. I mentioned to you that states have some things to do now, some decisions to make. The one I just mentioned to you is the voters. We're the sovereigns of this place. And ultimately, we need to act like it, and that's going to happen at the ballot box. We're either going to win or lose this battle ultimately on November 6th at the ballot box. And here in Virginia, for the first time in my lifetime, we are a swing state. I believe that we are going to be in the winners column in the presidential race. I believe. And of course, we have one of the most significant Senate races going on in the whole country here between 2 former governors, Allen and Kaine. And one has said he'd repeal, and one has said he's perfectly happy with the health care ruling, that being Tim Kaine. So we get a difference there too. Not only do I think we're going to be on the winning side of the presidential race, but we can add one of the very small number of senators necessary who are committed to repealing this bill to the U.S. Senate to make that happen too. So Virginia is going to play a role that we have not seen before. And you're already seeing it in your television with ads and your phones ringing sometimes and those kinds of things. And get used to it. There's plenty more to come. But what I really want you to do is get into it. Don't get used to it. Be part of it. This is the most important election you're going to ever live through. In my view, I don't see how it can get any bigger than what we're facing now. The downside of losing and leaving this president in office for 4 more years is more than I care to contemplate. In my role as AG, I see the damage they do. I see the regulatory burdens, the loss of opportunity, the loss of choices for business owners, and how they're smothering various parts of our economy that they don't like. And there's people involved in that. It's always about people. One thing that every conservative, every libertarian should always remember is this. This is as immutable a law of economics as gravity. When you have this kind of across-the-board regulatory assault, the first people hurt, and the people hurt the worst, are the poor. Never, ever forget that, because there's no way around it. There's no way around it. People who have money to invest, you can snap your fingers and move it around the world today in ways that have never been possible before. If I live in Appalachia and we've got one industry, coal mining, that's under attack by this administration, that's all we have, I can't move around the world like that. And even if I could, it's not the kind of thing I want to do. I don't want to leave the best country in the history of the world to go follow that capital around. I want a country where that capital wants to come here so I can have a job. You drive through those parts of Virginia, you drive through the North Carolina border, they have long-term unemployment that doesn't even show up in the numbers. Those people know they're under assault. You don't have coal mining in Richmond. But in Southwest Virginia, that is the industry. I live in Northern Virginia. You all have a similarly dynamic economy here. If you took one industry out of this region, most people in this room wouldn't even notice. You wouldn't even notice. You take one industry out of Southwest Virginia, you don't have any industry. For Pete's pizza place in Southwest Virginia is a coal job. Because without coal, they ain't there. And power, and I'm sure you all follow this closely, so I won't go into too much detail. But what the Supreme Court said is that the federal government can't hold the $3.7 billion of federal funding for Virginia's Medicaid program. It's almost exactly half our Medicaid spending. They can't hold it all hostage to Virginia joining the new Medicaid expansion. Because that's what they were doing. And the Supreme Court said that is coercive of states to a degree that violates the Constitution. That is the first time there's been any ruling like that, and part of it's one thing to get the ruling, it's quite amazing to get it 72. That was astonishing. But what that means for Virginia now is we have the decision to make. Jimmy Massey and his 99 colleagues in the House and the Senate and the governor have to decide whether they're going to undertake that Medicaid expansion or not. And there's a lot of aid in there for the states. The first couple of years, the feds say they're going to pay it all. And then they're going to ratchet it down to pay 90%. When it's fully implemented, we're still looking at hundreds of millions of dollars of cost. And the people who want to go down that road really need to tell us where they think that money's coming from. I mentioned I'm from Northern Virginia. You know, if you're going to take $200 million out of transportation, people in my region might have a little something to say about that. About safety and all that kind of contraception that is contrary to religion, their religion, in their insurance, right? That was one rulemaking. We got about 150 more of these to go. And who knows what's going to be in them? I don't know what's going to be in them. Heck, they don't know what's going to be in them. And that's a pretty important consideration when you're talking about signing up more or less in perpetuity for such an enormous expansion of Medicaid. That strikes me as very unwise. And I don't hear a lot of Democrats leaping to the barricades and saying, we got to get in. Although I'm going to be with Congressman Bobby Scott later this week at the Virginia Bar Association. And I know he's very enthusiastic about it. But you know, Republican or Democrat, I don't care who's in charge, the cost estimates they give you from the federal government, never right. Ever. Jimmy, can you ever remember one to be right? No, never. And they're broker than broke. And they're making this promise to pay X, Y, and Z out forever when they can't afford it already. I'm fairly idealistic about the rule of law and those sorts of things. I find that very bothersome. I find it inconsistent with the founding vision of this country. You know, we're not a clan, we're not a tribe, we don't pay for it. And it's very concerning to me. It's why one of the things I say about this administration, quite true, and nobody's really seriously disputed it with me, is it is the greatest set of lawbreakers to run the federal government in my lifetime. We just sued them again last week. You may not have heard about this. We sued the EPA, which I've taken calling the Employment Prevention Agency. We sued them along with Fairfax County over regulation of water in what's called the Acatink watershed. Acatink is a creek up in Fairfax County, a fairly large one. And they're literally treating water as a pollutant, which seems a little odd under the Clean Water Act. But they're trying to use it as a surrogate for other things, and so they're regulating the flow of water. The cost of Fairfax County of the remediation just in this one watershed would be in the $400 to $500 million range. That's why a Democrat Board of Supervisors is in this lawsuit. They're a plaintiff. Almost $500 million for one watershed. This is EPA's attempt to try to enter the land use business. Because they don't have enough to do apparently. They continue to break the law, to push the boundaries, and let's face it, the federal government gets a lot of deference. That's why it's so important for the sovereign changes have an interesting little twist to them. If the state government, meaning legislators, don't set up a healthcare exchange, the federal government's going to do it. Now, there are a lot of laws, including the Clean Water Act, where EPA and the federal government sets these standards and the states implement them. We do environmental enforcement in my office, and we do it. We take it very seriously. But we have the state, like DEQ, for instance, has some discretion on how to implement the requirements. Well, under these healthcare exchanges, it looks like they're pretty much going to be micromanaged from the federal level from the get-go. So why bother stepping into the role of just being an administrative henchman for the federal healthcare exchange?
That's right.
More critical for our businesses is that the way these things are going to be financed, or will be financed for state healthcare exchanges, is that our businesses will be subject to $2,000 and $3,000 fines per employee if their employees go into the exchanges or if they don't otherwise meet the Nancy Pelosi standard for healthcare. In the law, it says those penalties don't apply if the federal government sets up the exchange.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let them do it.
Yeah, whoops. Whoops.
They can't afford it.
And I assume they'd rather go back and rewrite that, but remember, when this law was passed, this was passed through the Senate, it was just to get 60 votes. They weren't writing the law. They sent it over to the House. That was Christmas Eve, 2009, and then Scott Brown got elected.
Yeah.
Miracles do happen. And he got elected in Massachusetts, and all of a sudden, they couldn't send it back from the House or it'd be filibustered. So they had to vote that thing up or down. And remember, they didn't write it to become law. It was very sloppy. And while they were penalizing our businesses, if the state sets up an exchange, those penalties don't hit if the feds set it up. Now, naturally, and consistent with their commitment to the rule of law, one of the new 16,000 new IRS agents has written a charming little rule that says, oh yes, they will, but remember, laws trump regulations. And so they're stuck with the text of their own law. And so that, when you combine that argument, that defense that businesses have for these penalties, with the fact that we really don't get apparently any unique state say in our own healthcare exchange, if we set it up instead of the federal government, then why do it? It costs us between $5 and $25 million a year to run this. Well, let them do it.
Yes.
And we'll see what happens. But again, that's the other decision. So that's one that lies ahead of us as well. And I guess it was last Thursday, phone call with the legislators. We had about a third of the General Assembly on, Republicans and Democrats, and walked through the Medicaid and healthcare exchange issues for them. So they can make their own decision. Again, for this one also, since I'm running for governor, I'll let you know what I would do. I wouldn't set them up. I wouldn't set them up. Let the feds do it. If we want this thing repealed, it's in our hand, especially in Virginia. It's going to come down to November 6th. That's what this is all coming down to. So, Joe is offering opportunities to get involved. I would urge you, watching Fox News, watching CNN, watching MSNBC, won't get the job done. It won't get the job done. You've got to bring the record of failure of this president to the people we know. And we've got to bring the elements of success. Mitt Romney's got an accomplished resume. And, we're about to...
is listen to the mic. How much, I don't know how better I can do this. What is your opinion on the House passing multiple iterations of the repeal Obamacare bill? Symbolic, strategic, or a waste of time and money?
Of course, the House, since the